All right, here we are with another Ovadia Heart Health Telemedicine live stream. And today I am thrilled to be joined by Robert Orion Sikes, a lifetime natural professional bodybuilder um, he took a very unconventional path to peak performance and long-term health. Robert, after years of following traditional high-carb approaches and traditional bodybuilding nutrition, Robert experienced declining health and disordered eating, which led him to experiment with strict, well-formulated ketogenic approach back in 2014. That decision not only transformed his physique, earning him pro status and elite competitive results in the sport of bodybuilding, but also reshaped how he thinks about metabolic health, sustainability, and fueling the human body. Today, Robert is dedicated to teaching others how ketogenic principles can be applied far beyond bodybuilding to improve their health, their well-being, their energy levels, and their overall quality of life. I'm excited to explore how these lessons translate for everyday people like you and me. With that, Robert, thank you so much for being on. And before we get started, I want to just put up our medical disclaimer, just so that everyone knows that what we're talking about today. Here we go. Get that back. Oh, man. Let's see. There we go. What we're talking about today is for educational informational purposes only, not to be confused with medical advice. If you do want to reach out to us at Ovadia Heart Health, you can send us an email at team@ifixhearts.com. And with that, we will get on with the interview. Robert, thank you so much for taking the time to be here today. You've got an incredible story, and I'd love to give you a chance to just tell us all how it all got started for you, how you went from traditional way of eating for your competitive adventures and how you ended up finding the ketogenic diet and some of the challenges and struggles you went through in the process.
Yeah, well, thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here. Yeah, as you said, I had started kind of with conventional bodybuilding means. I was eating a lot of carbohydrates. I was super scrawny when I started lifting. I was not a bodybuilder by any stretch of the imagination. I was about 115 pounds at the onset. And I just wanted to build size, build bone density, build confidence, probably with the ladies early on. And I started lifting, started training. And again, I was so small, so I was eating just everything in sight, a lot of high carbohydrate diet, just a lot of excess calories in general. Built a lot of muscle, but also put on a lot of body fat. My first competition was in 2012, and I lost about 80 pounds in 12 weeks for that competition. Won the competition, got very lean in the process, but lost a lot of muscle in doing so. And after that competition was over, I did what every bodybuilder does and has like a massive cheat meal, celebratory celebration meal, and put on about 20 pounds overnight. Basically threw away all that I had done, it seemed, in an instant. And that kind of led down a downward spiral of disordered eating tendencies, binging and purging, which plagued me for years. So I'd played around with multiple different types of diets, try and break free of that negative feedback loop. Kind of stumbled on keto by accident back in 2014 before it was popular, and then dabbled in that. And I believe my first interaction with the ketogenic diet as a mechanism was, or first introduction to it, I guess, was a podcast that Dom D'Agostino did on Tim Ferriss's show. And that was kind of like the eye-opening moment for me as to what it was that I was doing. There was actually a name associated with it. And then I just started refining that process, competed again in 2017 with the ketogenic approach, and have just competed with the ketogenic approach ever since. And I've been strict keto now for over a decade. In 2023, I became the leanest man alive at 3.9% body fat. Earned my pro status that year as well. And I've coached hundreds of people over the years and just helped them refine a ketogenic diet for their health optimization goals. And like you said, a lot of people are listening to this, probably have no aspirations of becoming a competitive bodybuilder, but there's so much that I use and leverage in my approach that is totally applicable to the masses, whether they ever plan on stepping on stage or not, because everybody would benefit from thinking of themselves and living and identifying as a bodybuilder to some extent. I mean, when it comes to prioritizing nutrition, prioritizing movement, asking intensity of your body in some form or fashion, like those are principles that we would all benefit from. And I'm just happy to share that message.
Well, thanks. Thanks for that great introduction. You really crammed a lot into a small space, and I know that there was a lot that went into your story. Um, Talk to me a little bit first about the some of the myths involved with nutrition, um, that that physical accomplishments cannot be accomplished without a high level of carbohydrates, which you've obviously you've proven that with your own story and the work that you've done and the results that you've gotten. But first of all, where does that come from, and why do you think it's so prevalent that people get so emotionally invested in the idea that you need carbs in order to do things that are physical?
Yeah, there's definitely a well steeped dogma in the athletic realms and circles around carbohydrates. I mean, yes, most athletes that perform at a high level do use carbohydrates, but how much of that is by way of mandatory requirement versus just societal pressures and stigmas? I mean, I've been bodybuilding since I was a junior in high school, so been quite some time now, and I've been ketogenic for over a decade. So I've been lifting for I guess about 17 years now and ketogenic now for more than half of that time. And I continue to put on more muscle, increase my strength in all metrics, and improve the composition that I bring to the stage every single year that passes. So I'm absolutely putting on muscle in the complete absence of dietary carbohydrates. You see a lot of people in the endurance sectors talk about carbohydrates. You see a lot of people in the, um, you know, different sports realms. In bodybuilding specifically, people point to carbohydrates and predominantly spiking insulin as being an extreme growth agent, which it is. And you're absolutely right. If you're taking a massive bolus of carbohydrates and spiking insulin, you can put on muscle, but you can also put on a lot of fat tissue. You can cause cancer cell growth. It's just an extreme growth agent in general. And what I have found amidst my peer group, my other competitive, friends and colleagues that do use carbohydrates, they're not putting on tangibly more muscle than me year after year. What oftentimes happens is at the end of the day, when the smoke settles and the dust clears, even if they were to put on more muscle, let's just give them the benefit of the doubt, say that eating carbohydrates allows them to put on a slight degree more muscle. They're also putting on quite a bit more body fat so that when they diet down for a competition and they're having to diet more aggressively to shed that body fat, they're actually losing more muscle than I am in the process. So the anti-catabolic nature of a ketogenic diet allows me to preserve the muscle that I build much more efficiently. So at the end of the day, I don't feel like they're coming out any further ahead than I.
Well, your results kind of speak for themselves. I wish I could put up some pictures, but you should. I encourage our listeners to go to Keto Savage on X. You're also on Instagram. Where else can people find you, Robert?
Pretty much everywhere. Keto Savage on X, on Instagram, on YouTube. I've got a ton of content on YouTube. I've got a podcast, the Savage Perspective podcast. I'll interview other high performing athletes, doctors, people in their field. So pretty much anywhere Keto Savage, I mean, you'll find me for sure.
So what do you find to be some of the advantages to a ketogenic diet, and go for the whole spectrum of aspects of the diet that you think work in your favor, whether it be for the sport itself or for other aspects of your life, including health, how you feel, energy levels, focus, anything else? What are some of the advantages of ketogenic diet to you?
Yeah, well, first and foremost, my relationship with the ketogenic diet came by way of me trying to resolve my negative relationship with food in general. And back when I started keto, it kind of happened by accident. I was doing a high carb diet and then I was binging and purging, like I mentioned. So then I started doing carbohydrate backloading, which was developed by John Kiefer. And that's basically ketogenic dieting during the day and then a bunch of high glycemic index carbs at night. And it kind of fed into that binging, purging tendency that I was dealing with, and it kind of allowed for it, so to speak. But I noticed
I've
that I
heard
felt,
I've, I've heard you talk about some of the foods that you would be eating during those refeeding at night. Tell us about that.
oh yeah, it was horrendous by today's standards. I mean, I would eat like a whole tray of Betty Crocker brownies covered in peanut butter and syrup, a lot of ice cream, just all the worst stuff. Like the whole goal of a backloading diet is high glycemic index carbs at night to intentionally spike insulin and then fuel the next morning's workout. And since I was struggling with binging and purging, it just kind of like allowed for it. It was kind of baked into the system. But I noticed from a digestive standpoint, I felt better without the high glycemic index carbs. So I started doing carb backloading minus the carbs, which was pretty much keto before I knew what keto was. And then I noticed that I didn't have any dip in performance. My inflammation was non-existent, and I felt more cognitively sharp. So I just started to, go with that as a dietary protocol, not really knowing if it would be advantageous from a competitive standpoint or not. But it really improved my relationship with food. And I think the reason was back then in 2014, 2015, keto wasn't popular. There was no books, there was no snacks, there was no websites. It just was real, whole, single ingredient foods. So there wasn't really any sense of guilt associated with the foods that I was consuming. I was just eating real food. And I think from a cognitive standpoint, from a relationship with food standpoint, guilt is one of the biggest catalysts for like a negative feedback loop. And by removing that sense of guilt, I just improved that relationship with food. And that alone was reason enough for me to stick with it. But then what I noticed from a performance standpoint is that because my inflammation was so minimized, I mean, pretty much non-existent, my training frequency could go through the roof. So in the past where I was, training legs one day and then having to take a week and a half off before I could train squats heavy again, I could literally train legs daily if I wanted to without having, any risk of inflammation or recovery hindrance. And as I got more deeply adapted, what I recognize is, from a metabolic standpoint, you get more deeply fat adapted. You upregulate MCT transporters that help shuttle lactate and pyruvate through the body, which allows you to kind of bypass that whole lactate threshold standpoint. So I didn't really get that burning sensation. So I could train with more frequency. I could train with higher degree of intensity before hitting that burn. And my training performance significantly increased, which obviously was advantageous from a bodybuilding standpoint. So everything in that regard improved as well.
Oh, sounds great. Can you just I want to hear more about your bodybuilding and some of the things that you've worked on, including I know a lot of people know you for your the product that you make, the Keto Brick. But just from a standpoint of how this relates to a more typical person who's maybe using low carb ketogenic approach with their health and body composition in mind, but has no aspiration to be a bodybuilder, just somebody that's trying to maintain and build muscle while losing weight. Obesity is rampant in this country. We have an epidemic of metabolic disease. What are some of the takeaways that you might have for more for the layperson who wants to use a ketogenic diet and also, build and maintain muscle in the process?
Yeah, well, to back it up even further, if we're asking the question of are carbs necessary, there could be an argument for carbs at the very top end of a performance spectrum. I would argue that it doesn't create a benefit. So I'm kind of in that camp that is suggesting from a deep fat metabolism standpoint, there's no need for carbohydrates in my sport of bodybuilding or many other sports. But for the lay person that's not trying to operate at that 1 percentile range in the first place, there's definitely not really much argument for excessive carbohydrates. You just don't need it. You don't need to carb up to peak performance for the layperson standpoint. You don't need to do that from a muscle building standpoint. When it comes to building muscle, obviously everybody would benefit from that, but muscle is the longevity organ, as they say. And the more muscle you have, the better you'll age. And when it comes to building muscle, you pretty much have to just check 4 boxes. You have to eat ample fuel, ample calories, ample food coming in to give yourself the building blocks to grow. So operating in somewhat of a caloric surplus is optimal. You have to consume enough protein to have the amino acid profile to recover and build more lean tissue. You have to have enough stimulus from your training to give your body demand for growth to occur. You have to have enough recovery to allow that growth time to occur. And if you check those 4 boxes, you can build muscle on any diet, really. But I think doing so from a ketogenic standpoint that's well formulated is going to just cut the adverse effects of unnecessary carbohydrates, sugars, and processed foods out of the equation. So from that standpoint, for the layperson, there's a pretty good argument for a ketogenic diet. But then just from a weight building or a weight training standpoint, anybody would benefit. Again, everybody should think of themselves as a bodybuilder. Whether they ever plan on competing as a bodybuilder is a totally different story altogether. But bodybuilding in and of itself is simply placing an emphasis on the food that you're consuming and asking your body to move, to demand activity and movement and mobility from your body. That's what bodybuilding is distilled down to. And I think everybody should benefit or would benefit from identifying accordingly.
Oh, that's awesome. I would love to get have our listeners get an idea as to what your diet looks like, um, both when you're doing your, your long stretches of training, and then maybe how it changes as you get ready for a competition. And are you still competing on a frequent basis? What is your schedule like with respect to the sport of bodybuilding?
So I typically take a few years off in between competitive seasons, especially as a natural athlete. Like if you're taking performance enhancing drugs and steroids, then you can compete much more frequently because you can put on substantial muscle. Even in a deficit, you can put on a lot of muscle on a pretty regular basis. But if you're natural, as I am, and you're a mature lifter and you've been lifting for quite some time, it takes a long time to add legitimate additional lean tissue to your frame. You're past those newbie gains, so to speak. So for me to look better every single time I step on stage, I need to have ample time operating at a caloric surplus, focusing on weight training. So I typically take 2 or 3 years off in between competitive cycles. My last competitive cycle was in 2023. I did 5 shows then. My next season will probably be next year in 2027. So I'm taking a little bit longer off season now. We just had another kiddo. So that's, created a lot more chaos in the personal realm. But typically when I'm competing or when I'm not competing, I'm eating the exact same thing. It's always the same food sources. The thing that changes is the amount of those foods and the macro distribution of those foods. So my training honestly stays the same, whether I'm in a building phase or a cutting phase. I'll increase cardio slightly when I'm in a fat loss phase, getting ready for a competition. But honestly, when it comes to cardio, I treat it as a minimum viable dose. I want to do as little cardio as possible to elicit the response I'm looking for, so that the most of my emphasis can be placed on the weight training itself. And then the majority of the manipulations come from just the nutritional manipulation. So I'll go through a very defined 7-phase protocol that I've laid out when I'm getting ready for a competition. And we can dive deep into that if you'd like. But basically, it's manipulating the macro distribution of that fat and protein. Carbs are kept at a minimum the entire time. So there's not really any manipulations there. I'm basically just changing the amounts of the foods that I'm eating as I get closer to show day. And that typically is a 4 to 6 month long process, depending on how lean I am at the onset.
How many carbs do you eat in a day?
It's usually like 10 to 20. I'm kind of doing a high fiber experiment right now just to see how my body responds. So with the high fiber, I'm closer to like 50. But generally speaking, it's 10 or 20 grams of total carbs.
And how about the protein and the protein target and the amount of fat that you have?
So that's totally dependent on what the stage is. Like when I'm in a building phase, like I am now, I'm typically around 3,500 calories. So my protein is anywhere from 150 to 200 grams, and my dietary fat is anywhere from 200 to sometimes 300 grams. When I'm cutting down for a competition, I'll start with a very high fat ratio at about 80% of my calories coming from fat. I'll gradually titrate my protein up, my fat down, to find my own unique protein threshold in the context of that fat loss phase. And then once I find that threshold, I'll start dropping both dietary fat and protein. Overall calories would be dropping the whole time, obviously. And then when I'm very low in my calories, closer to that show day, I'll start incorporating ketogenic caloric refeed. So a strategic bolus dose of both fat and protein to kind of elicit a peak response. Also giving me a temporary acute improvement or increase in metabolic rate, and then just filling out my muscle tissue to look more full, and dialing in my electrolytes for stepping on stage specifically. And then from there, after the show is over, I'll reverse diet slowly back into more of a maintenance or slight surplus intake, because it's not really healthy or sustainable to be sub 5% body fat for very, very long. It's cool to get there. It's a psychological hurdle that you benefit from mentally and emotionally. I think the net positive is there, but from a health standpoint, it's probably not conducive to the best health. So you can't really sustain that. So reversing out of that to kind of get back to some degree of normalcy is key.
What do you consider normal for the time when you're not close to a competition? What kind of body fat do you walk around with?
Like right now, I'm about 14. So
Okay.
between 12 and 15 is kind of where I try to stay in a building phase. And at 12, I mean, everybody's going to look different, but I've got so much muscle on my frame that at 20% body fat, I still have pretty visible abs, but that's a little too high for my liking. So I typically stay between 12 and 15 or so.
And do you have any advice, any generalized advice for people that say are finding themselves, say, someone in their 50s, like I was, who was weighing 280 pounds and wanting to take off some serious body fat? Where do you would you suggest someone start in terms of trying to lose weight on a ketogenic diet in terms of macros and stuff like that?
Well, if someone's coming from, a standard American diet, if they're eating just a bunch of nonsense or not tracking anything, they're just doing everything that they know they shouldn't be, like eating a bunch of fast foods and just junk food. If they're wanting to be intuitive with it and then just, make progress, simply eating wholesome, single ingredient, nutrient dense foods, high in quality fats and moderate in proteins and very low in total carbohydrates, they'll likely see a ton of progress just right out the gates, eating relatively intuitively like that. Once they do that for long enough, they'll eventually hit a plateau. And if they want to take it to the next level, it makes sense to start tracking your macro intake, tracking your true consumption, and kind of really getting that honed in, because what can be measured can be managed. I mean, case in point, I've got an employee that's 63 years old. He started working for me just over a year ago, had no aspirations of ever competing again, didn't really work out. He was like farm boy tough, had a ranch and farm for his whole life. But he had gotten pretty heavy, and he started working with me, started eating a ketogenic diet, wanted to improve his physique and composition. And he did that, lost a ton of weight, got really freaking lean, 63 years old, looks amazing. And he's now sprinting and running and working out every single day as if he were 17 years old. And he's 63 and he looks better than he ever has. So there's no age cap to it. I mean, progress is progress no matter how old you are, and it can be achievable no matter where you're starting from. So, start with what you're at and improve from there. And then recognize that if you want to take it to another level, there's always another level to take it to.
That's awesome advice. I mean, it's clear from the people that I've been exposed to over the last 7 or 8 years, a lot on the X platform, but elsewhere, I've encountered a lot of people in their 50s, 60s, and beyond. And now, as a health coach at Ovadia Heart Health, I've worked with people as young as teenagers, right up to in their 90s. And for every single one of them, we talk about resistance training and the importance of building muscle and maintaining muscle mass right through your entire life.
Mm-hmm.
So let's see. I wanted to get a little more info about the struggles that you went through with the binging and the purging, and not being able to manage the diet in an appropriate manner for your needs. How long did you struggle with that, and what was the key in getting over that hurdle? And it seems like you've gotten everything on a good track many years ago. I think that's probably something that more people are affected by than we really know. Even it's not something a lot of people talk about. So I think sharing that could be very helpful to some people.
Yeah, the binging and the purging and just having a negative relationship with food plagues so many people. It's really common in the bodybuilding space, like it runs rampant, and it's not really talked about. And from a general population standpoint, I think so much of it stems from that, guilt associated with the foods that they're eating. Like when you eat something that you know is not serving you or improving your potential, you have that sense of guilt associated with it. And then it becomes a negative feedback loop, and you beat yourself up internally, and then the cycle repeats itself. But if you couple that with the fact that most of the foods that people are binging on that are unhealthy, these pleasure foods, these hyper palatable processed junk foods, they're going to cause a lot more volatility with their blood sugar. So you're going to have, hyperglycemic moments followed by hypoglycemic moments, and your satiety signaling is all out of whack. Whereas if you just start eating real wholesome, nutrient dense quality fats and proteins that keeps your blood sugar more stable, you can kind of stabilize that from a physiological standpoint, kind of ruling out the psychological component, but just focusing on the physiological there. And then when it comes to from a bodybuilding standpoint, or honestly, just from a caloric manipulation standpoint, a lot of people, like from a bodybuilding standpoint, they drop their calories over a significant period of time. They lose a lot of body fat. They get very lean. And when you do that, your leptin and your ghrelin hormones are all in disarray. You're not able to really eat intuitively and manage that accurately because those hormones are in disarray. So you just become insatiable. You become ravenous. You can overindulge and overconsume. And a lot of people that are not competitors, but they've been chronically under eating, happens to them as well. Like if I talk to so many of my clients are middle-aged women that never plan on competing, but they've been chronically under eating for 20 years. And they are perfect candidates for a reverse diet where they strategically increase their intake, upregulate their metabolism, improve hormonal function, focus on weight training, which also obviously improves metabolic rate, puts them in a much better position to have an effective fat loss phase later. If you're already starting at a very low caloric intake, your metabolism is downregulated, your hormones are in disarray, like it's not going to be sustainable for you to go through an effective fat loss protocol. And so many people totally miss the boat on that. So improving your relationship with food by way of eating quality foods that you don't feel guilty about, and enough of those foods to let things stabilize before commencing on a fat loss journey, is of paramount importance.
So talk to me about the importance of weight training for people of all ages. Say a hypothetical 55-year-old woman who hasn't done any weight training. How do you get someone started on that? And how have you found any particular keys to helping a person make it sustainable? Some people are overwhelmed by the idea of going and lifting weights. You hear them say things like, I don't want to get too bulky. I don't want to build too much muscle and stuff like that. Fears that are probably pretty unrealistic for most. How do you get someone started? How do you get them motivated, and how do you make it last?
Well, the avatar you described is pretty much my mother. I mean, she was that exact person. She was not really weight training. She would do, a lot of physical work around the homestead and whatnot. And she felt like that was adequate. But as she aged, her bone density decreased in integrity. She broke some bones. She broke a hip. She had to have knee replacements. Like it just becomes a slippery slope. So she finally adopted a ketogenic diet, probably from my constant nagging. And then I was able to get her into weight training in some form or fashion. She's just scaled that up progressively over time. But she certainly didn't start with a bodybuilding style training plan by any means. I mean, I got her some simple resistance bands, and she was doing that with some body weight movements, like simple body weight squats, wall sits, push-ups using your knees on the floor instead of your toes. There's so many different ways to ease into it. And progress is better than perfection. So anything is better than nothing. And depending on where you're starting from, there's always something you could do to just stimulate the body in some form or fashion beyond what it's acclimated to. Because if your body is used to one thing and you never create some form of progressive overload for it to need to adapt further, it's not going to. Maintenance is a myth. There is no such thing as maintenance. You're either getting better or you're getting worse. And the best thing that we can do to preserve muscle is keep that muscle in demand. Same is true from a bodybuilding standpoint when we're trying to lean out for a competition. Having super high protein isn't what is going to preserve muscle the most. Having that muscle in demand is what preserves that lean tissue. So keeping that in demand is key. And for people like your example of a 55-year-old woman that has never, weight trained before, getting on her level and saying, hey, look, do some body weight movements, get some resistance bands, carry a jug of water from here to there. Just basic stuff is going to make a meaningful impact. I mean, my grandparents are in their late 80s now, and they don't live like this. And it's sad to witness. They have, they don't eat the right foods. So they're eating way too much sugar, not adequate protein or fat. Their cognition is massively declining. I think they're starting to show early signs, Alzheimer's and dementia. And it's a sad thing to see. They're not using their muscles, and they're just atrophying at a rapid rate. The best way to hedge against that is to keep living and keep asking of your body. And any way that you can do that is key.
Now, I'm sure that in your line of work, you hear people say things like, I don't do back exercises because I've got a bad back, or I can't do leg exercises because I've got bad knees. Now, clearly, if you have a medical condition, you have to take that into consideration. But do you think that most people have the potential to get back to a place where they don't really have such a bad back anymore, or they don't have, like they can overcome some of these fears?
Absolutely. I mean, from a back standpoint, obviously going to be very individualized, but like my whole family's got quote unquote bad backs, but I'm the only one that deadlifts, and I don't really ever have any back issues. When you strengthen all the muscles around your skeletal structure, around your joints, ligaments, and tendons, the ability to, hedge against injury is significantly amplified. So that first and foremost. If you have a existing injury, you may have to find movement patterns and exercises that don't aggravate that injury further, but that is totally doable as well. A lot of people that have an injury later in life can no longer do a conventional form of squat. For instance, they can't put the bar on their back. They can't do the squat for whatever reason, but they can do, a hack squat, or they can do a leg press, or they can do um, a vertical squat. There's a Smith machine squat. There's so many different ways to stimulate the muscle in the same fashion that's not going to aggravate that injury further. So just knowing what that injury is and then adjusting accordingly is key. But before that injury ever happens, ideally, you build the body to make it more resilient to protect against those injuries from occurring.
Perfect answer. I want to talk to you a little bit about the product that you have invented, and I'd like to know the Keto Brick,
Mhm.
how that came about. I think you were doing that as some experiments with your own diet. I'd love to hear the story and learn a little bit more about what goes into it and why, and how it works for you and how it could possibly work for others. And then along the same lines, you could talk about other dietary aspects that could be helpful for someone that's trying to embark on a more ketogenic diet while building and maintaining muscle.
Yeah, so the Keto Brick was honestly never meant to be a product at all. It was just kind of my own brainchild, a way to scratch my own itch, so to speak. Back in 2017, when I was doing that first ketogenic prep, there was, again, no food products that were keto, certainly none that had the macro profile that I was looking for. So I just created my own. And I was documenting that prep on YouTube at the time, and people kept asking about it, like where they could get it, where they could buy it, what the recipe was. And I just kind of wrote it off as nothing significant, but I kept getting these inquiries. So my girlfriend at the time, wife now, we just decided to roll up our sleeves and make a food product business. And that's what we did. So we, bootstrapped it from the ground up. I mean, we literally slept on a warehouse floor for 3 years building this business. We've kept production in-house from day one. And we continue to keep production in-house. Like I'm in my studio right now, but just behind that wall, I've got my commercial kitchen where I've got my employees making these things. We ship them all over the world. We have several different product flavors now. But the brick in and of itself is basically a 1,000 calorie ketogenic meal replacement bar made with either grass finished tallow or raw organic cacao butter as the primary fat source, both of which are the highest sources of stearic acid, which is a fat source that is a very long carbon bond that typically is digested and assimilated very well by the body. And it's shelf stable. So I like it from a meal prep standpoint. It just takes the guesswork out of nutrition. It's pretty easy to find quality sources of protein, not so much finding quality sources of fat, especially that are convenient. So I'll typically have one brick a day plus whatever meat I'm consuming. And that pretty much targets my macro goals for the day and just makes it convenient, makes it efficient, makes it streamlined, and therefore makes it sustainable. If you have a diet that you can sustain, then you're probably going to have way better success with it long term. And that's what I set out to create with the bricks.
Any tips for someone for whom 1,000 calories? What do you do? Just cut it in half if that's too much.
Yeah, I
Um,
mean, a lot of people, like I've got clients that are consuming much less than me, obviously, and they'll typically have half a brick. And you don't have to have a brick by any means. Like you can certainly make the diet work for you without any convenience foods whatsoever. But yeah, half a brick or one whole brick, and then whatever meat necessary to hit the macro targets for that individual. The beautiful thing of the brick is that it is shelf stable, so it's easy to cut it in half and then just pack it. A lot of parents use it for their kids' lunch boxes to give them a good, healthy option. Or if you're backpacking or hiking or something like that, you don't want to eat a Quest bar or a bunch of trail mix, it's a better option there as well.
um, okay, so how let's see, how long have you been making this now? This was commercially.
We launched the business in March of 2018, so
Oh
coming
wow.
up on 8 years now. And it's been a
Let's
journey, man. It's like I said, my wife and I were sleeping on a warehouse floor, sacrificing a lot to make this a reality. But it's something that I'm very proud of. It's something that, we do in house because I want to oversee complete quality control. So it's done for the right reasons.
So, do you have any particular tips for people? You referenced your mom and you referenced your grandparents, who sounds like your mom is doing pretty well with things. Do you work with a lot of clients that are in a position like your mom, or are you mostly working with serious bodybuilders? What is it? Who is it that you're working with most?
I work with all types. I mean, I love working with the competitive clients because they're very goal oriented. They have a driven, tangible goal via competition. But like the protocol that I use for my competitive clients is the same protocol that I use for my everyday lifestyle clients that have the same goal in mind. Like we all want to build muscle, we all want to lose body fat, we all would benefit from a metabolic standpoint cycling through a tangible building and cutting phase. So the principles that I use for competitive bodybuilders is the same principles that I use for everybody that should identify as a bodybuilder. The people that are not wanting to compete obviously don't have to go to the extreme of those incredibly low body fat levels or the nuances of tanning and posing and things like that. But everything else is totally applicable.
So are there any misconceptions that you think are prevalent that you'd like to knock down? Things that people think they have to do that maybe they don't, or vice versa? Like, what are some of the things that somebody who is in a position where your mom was before she started getting some of your advice? What are some of the things people should be doing?
A lot of the misconception I think stems around everybody. Like when I have a client and I have an onboarding call or consultation with them, when I ask them what their primary objective is, 9 times out of 10, they all say, hey, I want to build muscle and lose fat. And that's great. That's what we all should want to do. But the problem that a lot of people have is they try and do both simultaneously. And there are some certain situations where you could do both simultaneously. Like if you're a new lifter and it's all going to be a new stimulus to your body, you could build muscle and lose fat at the same time. But most people would benefit from having a defined building phase and a defined cutting phase. Not that you have to go to the extremes of a competitive bodybuilder on those spectrums, but actually giving yourself time to operate in a surplus, focusing on building as much lean tissue as possible, upregulating metabolic rates, improving hormone function, establishing a good healthy baseline is where I see so many people miss the boat because all of the messaging on social media, online is all about quick tips to lose weight, quick tips to cut calories, quick tips to drop, X pounds by Christmas or whatever the case may be, by beach season. Like everybody's trying to lose. They totally miss the boat on what's optimal for building muscle tissue. And if you're going through menopause, if you're postmenopausal, if you've been chronically eating, if you've not been active, like you need to focus on building muscle first and foremost. And you can't optimally do that if you're not eating anything and fueling your body accordingly.
So what would you have told me 10 years ago when I was weighing 278 pounds? What would have been the first step you would have recommended?
First thing is just to figure out your baseline. Like what is your true consumption at that weight? What are you doing? What is your lifestyle factors? What is your consumption that's making that your reality? Like what are you actually consuming in a day? Once I have that baseline established, then I can figure out what levers to pull. But a lot of people, they're wanting to lose fat, they're wanting to build muscle, they're wanting to manipulate their intake, but they have no idea what their baseline is. And as the old adage goes, like you can't possibly know where you're going if you don't know where you're starting from. So just running a battery of, ideally blood work tests, but honestly, just, a litmus test as to what your day-to-day looks like currently for at least a week or two to figure out what that is. And then from there, I can figure out, okay, what levers do we need to manipulate? If you're, wanting to lose weight and you're 270 pounds and you're eating 5,000 calories a day, then we can obviously have a pretty healthy caloric runway from which to taper. We can adjust the macros accordingly. We can figure out what your consumption is and swap out certain foods for better options. But if you're, chronically undereating, like if you're a middle-aged female that's been chronically eating 1,000 calories for the past 20 years, it's probably going to look a lot different.
Oh, excellent answer. What have you seen about with respect to your health markers on a ketogenic diet compared with where you were previously?
Honestly, I didn't really get a whole lot of tests done prior to being keto. I probably got some basic tests way back in the day, but that was, again, I've been keto for almost 11 years now, so I don't even have a lot of that data. But I've run several experiments since being keto, and I'll typically get a battery of tests done before I start a competition prep, and then every 3 to 6 months throughout a competition prep, and then with all throughout various different experiments I'm running, like this high fiber experiment. I've done FGF21 experiments where my protein's very low and my dietary fat's very high, and I'll get a battery of blood work throughout each of those. And I'm testing for, comprehensive lipid panel, metabolic panel, hormone panel. From a lipid panel, I don't typically have massively elevated LDL like a lot of people expect once they switch to a keto diet. I mean, it's elevated, typically my LDL is anywhere from 150 to 200 or so. But my HDL is also very high and my triglycerides are very, very low. So all of those numbers have honestly been pretty good. They're typically in the green. My hormone numbers are drastically impacted by the degree of body fat that I'm carrying around. So when I go down, and for a male, when you start getting down to, sub 5% body fat, like things just start changing drastically. So you have to expect that. Like I said, when you're that lean, it's not optimal from a health standpoint. But when I'm not in that lean competitive season, hormonal markers are solid. Everything's great. Like my lipid markers are good. My metabolic markers are good. My insulin sensitivity is top flight. So from a health standpoint, all of my markers have only seemingly improved since adopting a ketogenic diet.
Excellent. Do you let's see, you said you're going to start training in 2027 or you're going to be ready for competing again in 2027?
Yeah, I train every day. Like that never
Yeah,
stops.
right.
I'm just focusing on training and getting stronger and bigger now. But yeah, 2027 will be my next competitive season. So I'll probably be doing Worlds is the largest competitive stage for natural bodybuilders, and that's typically in November. So that'll be the main competition that I've got my sights set on in 2027.
And how old are you now?
34.
34.
Yeah.
What is considered the prime age in your sport?
That's the interesting thing. So in natural bodybuilding, you typically see people that are a little bit more seasoned. A lot of the pro athletes at that stage, are in their 40s, their mid 40s, because it takes time to put on muscle naturally, and they just keep getting better. I mean, natural bodybuilding, in my opinion, especially paired with a ketogenic diet, is the closest thing I can come to finding the fountain of youth. I mean, I just continue to get better with year after year, and I think if you pair it correctly and you are avoiding injury and you're making it sustainable, there's no reason you wouldn't keep getting better.
I'm going to put your website up again, and give you a chance to let us know if we missed anything, or if there's anything you'd like to cover or talk about that we haven't already had a chance to talk about. I find this conversation fascinating, and I really think it's great that people that need a low carb ketogenic diet for their medical well-being have someone like you to look at and understand that they can also achieve the a reasonable level of muscular preservation and building while staying on a low carb ketogenic diet.
You can absolutely get better as time goes on, no matter what your starting point is. Let me ask you this, Chris, how long have you been following this way of eating?
8 years,
8 years.
almost 8 years.
Okay, so you've been in the space long enough to know that 8 years ago, similar to me, like 10, 11 years ago, this was such a novel space. There was so much energy and excitement. There was new conferences coming up. There was a sense of community and camaraderie that you seemingly don't have to the degree that today as we did back then, it seems. So I would just end on this parting thought of people coming into the space now in 2026, I guess it is. There's so much derision online. There's so much negativity. There's so much informational silos and dogmatic energy and negative thinking that somebody coming in could easily lose sight of the bigger picture, the overarching goal, the positive voices out there. And I would just encourage all of them to recognize what it is they're truly trying to accomplish, recognize that the healthier they are, the better they're going to be able to serve their fellow human being, and to find a community and a sense of belonging amidst people that are doing it for the right reasons, as you are, and just cling to that, because we need to have some sense of camaraderie and fellowship to see it through with any dietary protocol. So I would just keep recommending that you fight the good fight, and people listening find people that they can have as an accountability factor.
That's an excellent way to wrap things up, Robert. I really appreciate you taking the time and sharing some of your experience, your journey, the things you've learned, and the product that you've developed. Go to ketosavage.com if you want to learn more about Robert and follow him on his social media. That's Keto Savage. And I guess with that, we'll wrap up. I appreciate everybody that's joined the live stream. The recording will be available on the iFix Hearts YouTube channel. And thanks again, Robert. Appreciate it.
Appreciate you.